Hello, and welcome to another episode of ZAP Chat. And once again, I am joined by Yanis.
Hello.
Great. So this week we are going to be talking about the automation framework again. This is part two of, I actually don't know how many parts it's going to be of.
Well, it's a big framework,
It's
right?
a big framework. And so what I was thinking of doing, we would start going into details of the environment and the different types of jobs. But I mentioned this to Ricardo, that's THC202 online. He's working on, he's one of his key guys working on ZAP. He's been working with us since 2011, and he's working full time on ZAP now, thanks to the Secure Software Project. And I mentioned this to him and he said, great, I will try and keep creating new jobs so you never get to finish this.
Classic.
Yeah, I'm hoping he's joking, but maybe not. He worked quickly. So we're going to see how far we get, and exactly what we cover may change over the course of the period and see what we all get up to on the automation framework, which is definitely one of our focuses right now. So without further ado, I will share my screen. And the first thing I'm going to do actually is take you to zaproxy.org. Because I just want to show you the documentation here, which I have shown before. So documentation, automate, and then automation framework. And what this does, it shows you, it's all the help pages. And so you can actually go in and you can see all of the details, and you can see, as you see here, we've got the environment and all of the different options that are available in the YAML file. So what is the environment, and how do you use it? So the environment is kind of it is the environment for this particular job. So it's the context. I don't want to use the word context. We use that already in ZAP. So it is actually a set of contexts potentially, but it is the applications and URLs that we're dealing with this particular plan.
Everything you're going to be attacking in the context of your automation set of
Exactly.
actions.
Yeah. So you want to set this up. This is set up at the beginning. It has to be the first thing, and you can't change it. So this is for one particular job. You can obviously change it while you're editing the job, but one in the actual plan, it's fixed. So the environment consists of one or more context. You have to have a context or the plan won't run. But there's a lot of information here, and I'm not going to go through it all of it right now. We will have another session later on where we're going to more details. But if you have a look, key things are a mandatory list of top-level URLs, and everything underneath will be included. So you have to have at least one URL, and then we have these include and exclude paths. Now, if you're used to ZAP, then you will know that, well, if you've played around with context, you will know that contexts are defined by include and exclude paths, and these are regexes. So these allow you to define any set of URLs that you want. And a context can be, I mean, typically it'd be an application, but it could be part of an application, or it could be an application that spans multiple hosts. It's really up to you. So it's
the most classic include path typically involves a star followed by the URL .com domain, right, with a / of whatever is in scope of the penetration test, of course. And the most standard exclude is anything that is not part of the target host, right, for a penetration test of the set of applications.
if you've got, say you've got example.com, which won't be attacking, but you'd have example.com, HTTPS, example.com .star, just to include everything underneath there, and nothing else. Everything else is treated as being out of scope. But you might well exclude paths. You might well have your logout URL, particularly if you're doing authentication. Or you might have a section of your application that's particularly sensitive that you don't want to touch as part of this particular test.
Yeah, that's a good example, actually. Yeah.
So those, and I'll show those in a minute, but the rest of this, the authentication part, I said, we will cover that in a future session. That's so we've got authentication, verification, session management, technology, which again we'll talk about probably in the future, and users as well. So that means there's not so much to cover here, which is great. The one thing is variables. So you can define variables here, and these then get used throughout the rest of the plan. And these also cover environmental variables. So if you've got environmental variables, then you can use them in exactly the same way.
And
Which kind of
Simon, why are environmental variables important in the context of automation?
well, there's two things. I mean, one classic one is if you've got authentication and you want to specify credentials and you don't want those hard-coded. Even on test systems, it's not great to have hard-coded credentials in your configuration. So you could have these in your CI/CD secrets, and then they will be set in environmental variables, and the plan will pick them up from there. Another one is where you have a generic plan. So you've got lots of services, half a dozen or dozens of services, and you've got a plan that covers all of them. So you've got a set of similar services, so you want to test them in a similar way, but rather than have a plan for every single service, you have a generic plan and you use a variable for the URL. And then you can actually set that and run the same plan for all of your services.
Yeah, very good.
And then finally, we have these parameters. So basically, you can choose to fail if there's a warning, if any of the jobs warn, or if any of the jobs fail. And you can choose whether to write the job progress to standard out.
Very important, the fail on error or on warning when you're doing CI/CD, continuous integration or continuous development, because that will determine effectively, which stage do you get a phone call from the dev team complaining about the fact that you've just ruined their pipeline.
Exactly. Or if you have scheduled scans and you actually want to know if something goes horribly wrong. So you might have a scheduled scan and you're expecting some particular vulnerabilities because either they're low priority or, I mean, if they're false positive, I'll show you how you can set those. But it'll show, you can choose to ignore those things, but you might want to fail if you don't find isn't enough URLs, because that might imply something's gone wrong, or if the authentication appears to have failed. Those are the kind of things you'll want to fail on. So that was the environment, and what I'll do is, so I'm going to now start talking about some jobs, and you'll see the environment as we're going through this, and you can see there's a lot of jobs here, but what I'll do is switch to ZAP, and we want to go to the automation tab. And if I try and make this bigger, sometimes it doesn't seem to like doing it. Yep, when I'm recording a video, but now we can see a bit more of the plan, and I will create a new plan. And now you can see the jobs, they're not in alphabetical order. They are in kind of a logical order. And I think the first few things like alertFilter, passiveScan-config, replacer, and script, they are all kind of configuration type jobs. And so they're the ones we'll focus on. And then we've got a set of jobs which are much more exploring. So the requester, GraphQL, import, OpenAPI, SOAP, and the two spiders.
Of course. Yeah.
Then we've got a couple of delay jobs, a delay and a passive scan wait. So they're another category. We'll come to those after explaining the exploring side. Then we've got the active scan, the attacking one, all on its own at the moment, and a couple of reporting jobs. So they're kind of, and I think we'll go through the jobs in that order, really. So,
all right, starting from the top.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is, well, first of all, how do you actually create a context? So you can just say use a default context, but that's kind of empty for me at the moment. And you can configure the context of the environment through the plan, but it's usually better actually setting it up separately. So it's much easier. We're just going to I'm going to use budget. It's nice and simple. And all I do is just go to the budget first page, and that will do me. So we now have budget in our sites tree, and I'm going to right click on the top URL and including context, and I'll create a new context so we can and what we'll see is we've got an including context, we've got the regex, and we don't have any excludes at the moment. And we've got loads of options here for configuring the context. Now, not all of those are supported by the automation framework yet. They will be in time. But this is generally the easiest way to actually use the sites tree and the context dialog to configure the context for your automation framework plan. And we've got other videos on the context, which go into more detail than context. They're a bit older, but they're still very relevant. So now we've actually got our budget context. We are going to choose it. And what I'll do is I'll choose the alert filter and the passive scan. And because they're configuration ones, they don't do anything. So I'm going to choose a requester. I know it's an exploring one, but we're just going to use it as a way to actually do things. So we've now created our context, and we can have a look at this, and we can see that by default we fail on error and not on warning. We have no variables, and if we go into budget, we'll see we've got the top level URL, and we've got an include regex, including all of that, and no exclude regexes. So at the moment, they won't do very much. None of them will do anything. So what I'll do is go to the requester, and the requester's job is to make requests. And you can make any number of requests, and you don't have to do it at the beginning. You can do it at any point. So I will select a URL, and we'll select the top URL, and that'll do. So that is all this job's going to do. So what I'm going to do is actually start a new ZAP session. And normally ZAP session, if you start a new ZAP session, it clears everything. It doesn't clear the automation framework plan, because it's a really useful way of being able to test things. And you often want to be able to test your plan in isolation and against a clean ZAP session, so you can see it's doing what you expect.
Right.
So that's why we're not clearing the automation framework plan. So I will now run the plan. And as you see, it runs very quickly. We're not doing very much. And again, we've created this context called budget, and we've made a request. Now, what about these configurations? Well, the first one I'm going to talk about is the passive scan configuration. So we don't need it. As you'll see, we've actually got a whole set of alerts here. But what happens if you actually don't want the passive scan to work in exactly in the default way? And the default way is to enable everything. So let's pick one particular alert. Doesn't really matter, but I'll go for the missing anti-clickjacking header. So say for some reason you're not interested in this. This is not something that you're worried about for whatever reason. Maybe you actually need to embed this site in another portal. So what we can do is we can go to the automation framework plan and configure passiveScan-config. So this is a job you have to run at the beginning. Well, you typically have to run at the beginning, because it doesn't have any effect on things that have already happened. It only affects things that happen in the future. So you're configuring the passive scanner, and then for whatever it does in the future, what's happened in the past has been and gone. So one thing you can see, scan only in scope, that's by default true. Enable tags, we don't really use tags in automation, so at the moment anyway, so you probably don't want these enabled. And you have an option to disable all rules. Now I don't want to do that, I just want to disable one rule. So
we can head over to the rules tab.
Yep, so we now know that all the rules are enabled because I haven't disabled them. And the one I wanted was the anti-clickjacking header. That one there, and I want to turn it off, which comes up by default, and we can choose the threshold, which is off, low, medium, high. So I will save that, and I've now configured passive scan config job how I want. You'll notice it's now got a grey icon rather than the green one because it's changed since we've actually ran things. And I will start the session again and run the plan.
I think what's interesting here is that you can include rules, and I think for our viewers, you can include rules which effectively turn off specific scans. In this case, it was one involving the header.
Anti-clickjacking, exactly.
Yeah. So that took a little bit of rewiring in my brain when I first did it, because effectively, the question is always, do you set up a blacklist of rules or a whitelist of rules, right? And generally you want to do what you're doing, Simon, because if you disable all of them, then you risk disabling something that potentially you want, right? Instead, you want to have the scanner typically configured with a rule set that is wider than the scope that you have, in case throughout the build process or the test, if it's a penetration test, somebody comes across a specific misconfiguration of low-hanging fruit or similar, which you're meant to catch, but you don't catch because you've started with a disable all rules, right?
Exactly. But there again, if you've got something like CI/CD, you may well say, we've got a set of rules that we absolutely want to run and nothing else. So
Yes.
we will actually going to fail if we fail to find anti-CSRF tokens or missing headers, something like that. So as a security professional, you might say, okay, we're going to run a baseline scan against every PR. We know it's going to be quick. It won't take long. And we're actually only going to enable a very small set of rules that are absolutely must for us. And if they fail, we fail the build, or we warn on the build, or something like that. But so you've got, your two different cases, enable everything, disable everything, and then go and tweak things how you want. And we'll see we now no longer have the missing anti-clickjacking header. So that's really what the passive scan configuration is about. It's configuring the passive scanner, and it means you can turn things on and off, and whether you can set the threshold, and the threshold is a level at which the rule will actually tell you that something's wrong. And not all of the rules support all of the thresholds, but the help should explain when to use which ones. And if you have it off, then turn this off, then you won't get any alerts from this particular rule. So if you're not interested in them, turn them off, and it will speed things up ever so slightly. So what else can we do? Well, we've got the alert filter. Now, the alert filter is there if you want a bit of fine grain control. So let's go back. We've got a cookie without same site attribute. And if we have a look at this, we'll see it's JSession ID. So, it's actually a reasonable alert, but say this is not one we're interested in. Say that this particular cookie, that's fine. But for other cookies, we might actually want to alert on this. So we don't want to disable this rule. So what can we do with that? So with that, what we can actually do is that's what the alert filter is for. And again, this is something that has to be, you typically want to do this early on so that anything afterwards is affected by the alert filter.
Yeah, that's important, right? Because you want to basically be doing configuration first, broadly speaking, then you want to be doing any sort of discovery or censorship, and then you want to be doing the more active scanning type of jobs.
Exactly. So all of these things have a job name, you can change this. And again, we've got this option to delete the global alerts. So we have, actually that should be global filters. I think that's a mistake there. So that's a typo, which I'll need to fix. So we have filters, and we got global filters, and we've got context filters. And
what's the difference between the two?
So the global ones apply to absolutely everything, so all of the sites. Right. And actually what I'll do is, if we go into the ZAP properties, we'll actually see we have global alert filters here, and they apply to everything. And then we actually have the alert for context filters in the context itself. Now, normally, well, I would normally choose the context filters myself, because particularly if you're using the ZAP desktop, they apply to everything you do, and they don't change when you change a session.
Yeah. So keeping things local is, the starting point, of course. Yeah.
Exactly. So what I'm going to do is, it was cookie without same site, wasn't it? So go up to cookie without same site attribute, and I do want this to be a context specific one, and we're going to have it. We're going to put it down on false positive. Well, actually, we could put it as info.
Yeah, I think info is better.
It's
Yeah.
info. It's not. One thing is, if you have telemetry turned on, then we get stats on false positives. This is really helpful for us because what you're saying is ZAP has got something wrong, and we don't get details, so we don't see the requests and responses or anything like that, but we do get stats on the number of false positives per scan rule. And we actually publish these on the website. So if we go back to the website and go to documentation and statistics, then highest false positives last month. And you can actually see, well, there you go, cookie without same site attribute. I didn't know, I hadn't checked that one was there. So this is actually one where, if it's, this would probably be better to have it as info rather than false positive. So that's not one where we're going to go, okay, we're now not going to, we're going to change this rule. There's probably no bug in the rule. It's more a configuration thing. But it's, we do get information about specifically false positives, which is very useful. It helps us understand which rules have problems. So I'm going to say info, and I'm actually going to choose the parameter as well. Now, it was actually J session ID. And this means that if ZAP finds another cookie without the same site attribute, which is not called JSession ID, then it will raise an alert for it at low priority or whatever, rather than info.
Now, you might say, why is that important, right? Well, if all of a sudden a dev team has gone rogue, so to speak, and decided to just code their own authentication stack and cookies, right, this is how you would find that out.
Exactly. So let's start again and run it. And hopefully now we will see, cookie without same site attributes. So did I get something wrong?
Let's have a look at the filter widget info.
Yes, I got 3 S's there.
Ah, yes.
Not the most obvious one. So this is a good reason. Always test your configurations before putting them live, because there's, that's one you could go, okay, I've now sorted, go away. And particularly in this case, I meant I got an extra thing, but it could mean your configuration's excluding too much. You don't find out things you want to know.
Imagine trying to find this rule on command line, right? It would just be so painful.
So let's have a look. And yay, this time cookie without same site attribute is being logged at information level rather than a low finding. So this is something now you can still fail your build or raise warnings or something if you find cookies without the same site attribute apart from JSession ID.
Very good.
So that is, how are we doing? How long have we been now?
It's 4 o'clock, so we've been on for 30 minutes minus 6 minutes at the beginning where we chatted about things minus, I think it's time to wrap up, actually.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, in that case, we'll wrap up now. And thank you all very much, and see you next time.
See you.